All right, so I am sitting across from Mitch, who is the entrepreneur behind Redbeard. Redbeard is a cafe, and I can't believe you haven't heard about it if you live here in Kamloops. It is one of the community hubs that has been growing and continues to grow as a local coffee favorite shop. And I had the opportunity to see it grow from essentially almost inception to what it is now. It's become much more than just a cafe. He has put on many different events from the space. But Mitch, go ahead and introduce yourself and kind of let us know where people can find you and what's the easiest place to connect.
Sure, yeah. I'm Mitchell Forgy, and me and my wife and a business partner got Redbeard started on the North Shore about 5 years ago. We always had this like dream and vision of operating what I, in a sort of kumbaya state of mind, call a community center. But essentially, it's this weird hybrid between a pub, a restaurant, and a coffee shop. And really, the concept behind it was, if you want to build a place where people come to hang out, where people build a community, is that you have to make the barrier to entry low. So our coffee has always been that. You can come by and you can get a cup of coffee. It's always inexpensive. It's very democratic. It's wonderful. At the same time, I love craft beer. I think craft beer has been fueling this community-led initiative across North America for 10 plus years. It's the fastest growing employment sector in North America. And that's just because craft beer is bringing people together in a way that businesses haven't in a long time. That's a huge part of what we're doing. And I think ultimately in 2018 in Canada, people don't drink 12 beers and, for lack of, less colorful language, go home and, like beat the dog and yell at the wife and yada, like that drinking culture is gone.
Yeah. And then I found myself falling into that drinking culture, actually. So that's why I try and keep myself to one beer.
Yeah.
For that exact reason. But
yeah, craft beer has led that, but then the other part of that is food. So, we needed to make sure that we have good food. And then to this day, 70% of our sales is still food.
Oh.
So, yeah, it's been mind-blowing growth. I've said that revenue is luck. And I think that part, knock on wood, has been pretty lucky for us. But making our business work, and providing the sort of back end that lets everybody be successful, hopefully is some sort of skill, I hope.
Yeah,
and
no, totally.
We seem to be going all right so far.
Yeah, and I read somewhere that you have one of the best rotating taps in all of BC in terms of your craft brews, which is pretty amazing considering, you do run quite a small cafe.
Yeah.
And so, to have 10, how many taps do you have?
We have 13, 3 taps of cider, 10 of beer, and that'll be hopefully growing before summer hits. Most restaurants, when they turn on their patio, it adds about 20% of seating. For us, it almost doubles our seating. So we're hoping to get that going before then. I don't know if this will be out before March 24th. But we have an event then called Péché Day, which this is our 3rd year going. There's a brewery in Quebec called Dieu du Ciel, and they're the only brewery in Canada that makes one of the top 10 beers in the world, according to ratebeer.com. It's called Péché Mortel. It's a coffee stout that's about 10%. They do this international event called Péché Day where they release a whole bunch of special varieties. Like they do one with peaches in it, and they do the one that's aged in bourbon barrels. They, in fact, do one with our coffee in it, which we've done 2 years in a row now. And then we age those, we cellar those, and so it's this opportunity to try the same beer in a whole bunch of variants. This event happens in New Orleans, Paris, Stockholm, London, New York City,
and Kamloops,
Hong Kong, and Kamloops. So we actually have like these band like T-shirts sort of things that go on the back, and it lists all the pubs all over the world where it's at, and it's like, yeah, Kamloops is the only one below 100,000, and in fact, until Victoria started doing it, we were the only ones below 1 million in the whole world that did this event.
That's really cool, and we could talk beer all day because Lord knows I love beer to the point where it's definitely a problem in my life. So I appreciate you just having a single beer with me today. But the reason for us to get together was you wrote a manifesto back in, I think, 2013 or so about parking lots. And I think it's a really interesting take on what, Kamloops could become and how parking lots are basically the bane of Kamloops. Like, and kind of just start at, what drew you to start writing your book. It's not just a manifesto, it's a book, yeah. but it definitely borderlines on kind of actionable things and things that you want to see happen right away. I'll let you take it from there because it's 180 pages. There is a 20-page preamble that people can read.
Yeah, there's lots of pictures though. Lots of pictures. So Stronger Kamloops is a book that I wrote. Basically, my first introduction to Kamloops when I moved here in 2009 was I had moved from London, England, where I loved everything about Europe. I loved walking everywhere. I loved taking transit. I loved being able to have a beer and not worry about how I was going to get home. I liked, the architecture. I liked the way that you interacted with people in your everyday life. You were out in public all the time. And when I arrived in Kamloops, coming back to Canada, I grew up in Edmonton, as an aside, but I was so disappointed to lose that public life culture again. And I started to really get into what that was all about. I read a book called The Geography of Nowhere, which was written in 1992 by James Howard Kunstler. It was given to me by a university professor up at TRU, and he said, I think that you just don't have the language to describe what it is that you're seeing and how you're interacting with it, and this book will give you that language. And he was right, and it led me down thousands of podcasts, blogs, books, etc. And I started to do all this research, and so I started to show up at city public hearings, and I would get up in front of everybody and say to council in front of a room of 100 people at some rezoning or budget something, and I would say the city of Hong Kong has 7 million people in the same land area as Kamloops, and it's beautiful. Why do we suck? Why can't we do better? All this stuff. And one day, I had only been there for a little while, but the mayor at the time, Peter Millibar, sort of talked to me after the event, and he said, there's a lot of people who show up at these events and complain about everything, but there's not a lot of people that go out there and do something. He said that the role of council is that we approve things that people bring to us. We don't start things ourselves. So if you go out there and do something awesome, we can approve that. But until somebody goes out there and says, I want to build a 30-story building, we can't approve a 30-story building. Until somebody says, we want to build a public square, we can't approve a public square. So that sort of, as a 22-year-old with no money, that I couldn't really do anything. I did try to build an apartment building, but that panned out poorly, and I had to pay the architect in my car because I couldn't afford the bill. But he still has it, and we still hang out.
Well, I'm glad you kind of explained what Millibar shared with you a while back, because I find myself falling to that same trap where I'm just a crotchety old man just complaining about things, and I think that's great that it's about what. As a true democracy is you bring something forward and let's see if things happen. Let's see if people want it. But where does parking lots fit into the whole scheme of your manifesto of how you see Kamloops to develop into the urban center or the city that it truly is meant to be?
Sure. So I think what you're referring to specifically is basically the city building requirement for how many parking stalls you have to have when building a business or building a building or something like that. So basically the premise of it is that if you want to build a walkable public place like London, you need to have all of your destinations, your interesting things, close to each other. The place where you live, the place where you're doing business, the place where you're getting your coffee, all those things need to be close enough to each other that walking is easy and enjoyable. Parking lots spread things apart. So then they create an incentive for you to want to drive because there's parking at each end, but not only that, the walking experience is less good. The more cars that are on the road, the more traffic there is, the more parking lots there are. It's a feedback loop that just spreads uses further and further and further apart, which makes walking less and less enjoyable and further incentivizes driving. But what a lot of people don't realize about this situation is that it's regulated by the city. There's a minimum number of parking stalls that you have to put in. And I think that this is one of the biggest things that's holding back development of multifamily, development in the urban core, development of businesses in existing walkable neighborhoods. At Redbeard, we are supposed to have, for the amount of seats we have, 42 parking stalls. And we have 13, and we are what's called a legally non-conforming business, which is that because our building existed before the current zoning code, we're allowed to exist. But if we were to burn down in a fire and had to rebuild, we would not actually be allowed to rebuild this business the way that it is because it doesn't conform to zoning codes.
And with me, I came in on Sunday and I had brunch, and your pulled pork potato pancake was unbelievable. You were packed. You were absolutely slammed. it was definitely tough to find one of the few parking spots that you have, but I don't think many of the people that were there actually did drive there in the first place. So with the way the Trunk Hill corridor is changing, and you're involved with quite a few projects, I imagine, or you're happy to see the projects come to light. These aren't people who need cars, and where do you think cars fit into the development of a new Kamloops?
Well, I think that the first thing is that people take my attitude and they take it to the extreme immediately, which is that, Mitch and or Donovan Cavers, for example, wants everybody to like get back in a horse and buggy and like yada. No, like that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that, if you have if you want to build a laneway house on your property, you have to have 5 off-street parking stalls. Well, so you're talking about what could be a single couple with one car living in the back alley in an existing urban walkable neighborhood with a single couple with a kid in the, big house with a single car. Why do they need to have 5 parking stalls? And so we need to think about taking 3-car families down to 2, 2-car families down to 1, making incremental changes. That 1 to 0, the way that Kamloops is built right now, is going to be pretty challenging. But the way I look at it is that you need to leave it up to the developers, the people who are actually putting their money on the line, to decide how many parking stalls they need. If you want to build a restaurant with no parking, well, you need to bear the consequences of that. If nobody can get to your restaurant and nobody can eat there because nobody can park anywhere near you, well, that's going to be you suffering. But you probably also don't want to build 50 parking stalls that are empty most of the time and pay $1,000 a week through the winter to get your snow cleared. You want to have the right amount of parking for your business. And the same with a multifamily development. Do you need to have 1.7 stalls per unit if you're building a multifamily, project on the North Shore, or do you need only 1? Or maybe you only need half. Maybe you put them up for half and you sell the parking stalls separate from the units, so that a person can actually internalize the cost of their parking stall. If you look at the cost of a parking stall in a multifamily development, you're talking about $40,000 to $60,000 to build a single parking stall. And people will say, oh, that's sort of a skewed number because the hard costs are only $20,000. But what that means is that the concrete there costs $20,000, sure. But that also assumes perfect circulation, meaning that there's no dead area in the parking lot that's devoted to no use, because you need to have a turning radius to get a car in there and all that. So by the time, you've found this sort of convoluted triangle site, it has all these dead areas in it that can't be used for anything. You can't turn those into parking stalls, so you end up with, let's say, 30% circulation. So 30% of what you could have sold if it was 100% developed goes to nothing, but you still have to build it. It still costs that $20,000 to build that parking lot size footprint, even though the parking stall isn't there. So by the time you take circulation out, you incorporate design costs, you incorporate rezonings, you incorporate the embedded costs of carrying the property and the interest on a $20 million loan for 6 years. You're talking about a $60,000 parking stall. So if a person looks at their downtown apartment and they go, oh, $240,000, that's crazy expensive. Yeah, but what if you separated that out? Well, actually, that's a $180,000 apartment with a $60,000 parking stall. Do you still want your parking stall? Some people are going to say, absolutely. I drive to work. I go out of town all the time. I need my car for my life. Fine. But it lets you make that decision. If you have to incorporate that cost into the cost of the unit, if your $240,000 unit is $60,000 parking stall and you don't have a car, if you're paying a 3.5% mortgage rate, you're paying, $400 or $500 a year interest, as an expense on a parking stall you don't use. Not to mention the fact that it's sitting there, further incentivizing driving because it exists. So the way I look at it is that if we really want to have anything leaning towards, trying to increase transit usage, trying to increase people walking, and the responsibilities, the social responsibilities that come with those things, the first thing we need to do is look at parking lots and say, is the city really equipped to be in the business of deciding how many parking stalls a person should have? Now, an awesome author out of Los Angeles, his name is Donald Shoup. He wrote a book called The High Cost of Free Parking. It's a very easy to read 200 pages, but there's also his like thesis that's like 1,500 with a whole bunch of graphs and numbers and stuff like that. He talks about the fact that, well, of course, if you leave it up to the developer, they're never going to build enough parking stalls for all the people who want to park there. But that's okay, because then they'll charge for them. So then you start to create a capitalistic, decision-making process in driving. And it's a little bit like desserts. If at Redbeard, at our restaurant, we offered a free dessert with every meal that you purchase here, you get a free chocolate cake. If that's put down in front of you for free, you're probably going to eat it. And then if everybody across the whole city was mandated to do that, if everybody got a piece of chocolate cake for free at the end of their meal, you'd have this like epidemic of obesity, diabetes, all these health problems that would be burdened by, the government. Our taxes would pay for these health problems that people are going to school for, or not to school, to the hospital for, And on the other end of it, those desserts still cost the businesses money. So they have to increase the cost of all their prices in order to cover the cost of that dessert. The parking is exactly the same. When you incentivize parking by making it free at both ends because you are forced to build so much parking that you could never charge for it, people will always drive, even on short trips where they could have walked, could have taken transit. And I mean, the great experiment that you see in this is the university. They have reserved parking stalls that you can pay extra money for that are sitting there empty. If you want to go to be a student at the university and pay a little bit of extra money, you can find a parking stall, no problem. But if you're expecting free parking, all of a sudden you're parking on Dalgleish or in front of some business that is getting pissed off at you and towing your car. But it's simply a place where there's parking is scarce and charged for, like the university, beside a place where parking is free. If you leave it up to everybody in the whole city to decide how much parking they want to make, all of a sudden, parking becomes a scarcer resource across the entire city, which for people who are on the margin, who have one car and are thinking about going down to zero, makes that decision a little bit easier. For people who have two cars and want to go down to one, makes that decision a little bit easier. But it's not about taking a 4-car family that lives in Juniper Ridge and telling them they can't have any cars anymore. It's about allowing them to internalize that decision making and decide what they want to do.
Yeah, totally. And we can see the experiment happening here on the Tranquille corridor with the station popping up, where people will hopefully be able to walk to the innovation center, go to work, and grab a beer here afterwards. And the whole idea of walking in places in Kamloops is it's not something that even came to mind when I first moved here. I felt almost trapped up in Aberdeen. If I didn't take the bus home by 8 o'clock at night, there's no way for me to go to Aberdeen where I started living.
To live in public, I was describing.
Yes, yeah, and I don't even know how I feel about it now, because obviously I don't live in Aberdeen anymore. I'm North Shore all the way, and will forever be North Shore all the way. But I just want to say, check out your book, or Mitch's book, if this is something that reverberates with you. He's got lots of information, all sourced, which is incredibly important. He's not just talking out his ass. He's putting the research behind it, because it's not just opinion. There's facts, there's research there, and I think it's really important that people really take this seriously as we see Kamloops grow and push the borders of what we actually do, because there isn't much more land that can really be developed, but we're seeing the population start to explode with the Lower Mainland come on out. But anyways, Mitch, we're kind of wrapped up at this point. We've actually pushed the time longer than we ever have. What's some few parting words you want to share with everyone?
When Peter, after that budget meeting, said to me, you need to go and do these things, a lot of when I went out to do these things, people said, oh, that's fine. That works in whatever place you found that case study. But this is Kamloops. It won't work here. And I've always found that so hard to believe. Walking, yeah, but it's winter here. We get ice. Oh, well, one of the most walkable cities in the world, Oslo, Norway. Yeah, they probably get a little bit of ice. Actually, they get a lot, for a lot longer than we do. What about Vienna, Austria, Salzburg, anywhere in northern Germany? these are places that seem to do it just fine and have for hundreds of years. Why can't we? And so that was really the nemesis for writing the book, was let's look at Kamloops' situation objectively and make the arguments from a Kamloops point of view, as opposed to always looking to other places that seem to do it better and try to emulate them. Let's try to do it from a Kamloops perspective.
Yeah. And so if you're ever on the North Shore, look for the big, bright green building. That's Redbeard. Grab a coffee. If you buy any food, they give table place cards that actually encourage you to check out the other cool places in town where you can buy food as well. Everything about this place is all revolves around the idea of community. So thank you, Mitch, for opening such a great shop, and looking forward to seeing where you take things next.
Thanks.